All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. I am going to move on now to nutrition and neuromuscular disease, which I get questioned a lot from a lot of our families, and this is a really important topic. So now I would like to introduce you to Stacy Garrison, a registered dietitian from the University of California, Davis Health. Stacy, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right. Hi there. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Stacy Garrison. Like Nicole said, I'm a registered dietitian or registered dietitian nutritionist at UC Davis Health. I'm also a board certified specialist in pediatric nutrition, which is where I spend most of my days throughout the week, with the exception being the neuromuscular clinic. I like to start with a little bit of introduction about me because nutrition is so very personal. So I want to make sure that you also know who I am. I joined UC Davis Health in 2013, and I joined the team in neuromuscular clinic last year. My goal today is to share my knowledge in diet nutrition as it relates to health across the lifespan. But I do want to, of course, specifically focus on the nutrition needs for people living with muscular dystrophy. In my work with the neuromuscular clinic at UC Davis, I work mostly with people with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, though I do talk a lot of nutrition with lots of other different people as well. And I believe that the principles I discussed today apply to the general population. And if there are more specific needs, it's even more reason to have a really personal, individualized conversation with your own registered dietitian. Let's get started. Next slide, please. Okay. It's really important to address why we eat what we eat, because it's different for everyone. As a registered dietitian, I think it's my responsibility to address the personal reasons why we eat and work with people to pair their medical or nutritional needs with their personal needs. We eat for a variety of reasons, of course. Some people have a nutritional focus on their foods, meaning they eat for the sake of nutrition. But it's impossible to deny that we eat for comfort. We eat out of boredom. We eat for enjoyment. Our eating habits change based off of our mood, our mental health, our living situation, our financial situation. I am a parent, and especially as a parent living in a pandemic, I definitely recognize that the way I eat and feed my family is dependent on the day, what our schedule looks like, how much time I have or want to give to preparing a meal and relative to other activities for the family. What our grocery budget looks like. I also have a toddler whose food preferences change on the daily. And so I often find myself choosing meals based on what I know my toddler will eat in addition to what meets everyone else's needs. In general, we do try to eat for good health. We eat for energy, but we also eat because it's fun. And I think part of my job as a registered dietitian is making sure that we can meet nutrition needs, but not take away from the enjoyment that is food. I try to balance that. And so I try to have very personal communication with my families. Thank you. Next slide. Okay. So specific to the nutrition considerations in muscular dystrophy, there's many, but I do want to review the topics I find myself discussing in clinic the most often. One being overnutrition, meaning taking in more energy or calories than the body needs to function. Too many calories in can lead to excessive weight gain and obesity. Obesity can weaken muscles. It can affect the body's ability to move. It can negatively affect lung health. Too much specifically of fat tissue can lead to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. So what do I look for? What are the risk factors for overnutrition and excessive weight gain? Those risk factors include lower energy expenditure, lower energy use, meaning you don't need as many calories as peers to maintain weight or if you're a child to grow at an appropriate rate. Limited physical activity, whether by choice or by function or ability. So you're not burning calories at the same rate, and so you don't need quite as many calories. Increased appetite, which can often be an effect of drug therapy, can lead to increased intake. You're hungry, you eat more. But that can lead to taking in more calories than the total body needs. Next slide. On the other end, there is, of course, undernutrition, and I am very watchful of undernutrition in people with muscular dystrophy. Undernutrition meaning not taking in enough nutrition to meet the body's need. This can limit strength and it can limit function. Every body has baseline nutrition needs to support basic functions of the body: brain function, lung function, heart function, muscle function, movement. Those who may be at risk for undernutrition include those with low muscle strength, not physically able to take in the nutrition that you need by mouth, swallowing difficulty, gastrointestinal problems, an increased body demand for calories and protein. Your metabolism is higher beyond what someone might be hungry for at mealtime. So you need to eat more than your body is telling you should. Prolonged or just long meal times can actually result in lower intake. And I'll talk a little bit later about how that's actually an intervention for some people, is shortening mealtime, which can have a net effect of increasing total intake. Those who are dependent upon others for nutrition are at risk for undernutrition because there's a disconnect between hunger and fullness cues and how much and when a person can eat. So it's very important that any kind of caregiver is very in touch with nutrition needs and hunger and satiety signals. Next slide. So on either end, overnutrition or undernutrition, comes weight management. So over and undernutrition does require a big focus on this, either increasing or slowing weight gain, promoting weight stability. As young as 5 years old, children can demonstrate excessive weight gain, especially if on steroid therapies or if they have lower physical activities than their peers. Conversely, weight loss happens very quickly in children too, especially related to an acute illness or GI or respiratory problems or a hospitalization. That weight can fall off quite quickly. Energy demands change with age, younger people needing more calories than older people, which is related to growth and activity. It's important to monitor weight trends along every person's individual curve or lifespan. For those of pediatric age, we do have growth curves that help us track weight. And my practice is to use standardized growth curves by the WHO or CDC, depending on age. This applies for children up to 20 years old. And I use it for trending purposes. It's helpful for regular assessments by any registered dietitian at a clinic visit. And it offers an opportunity to talk about weight trends specifically as they relate to recent eating and health patterns. I'm having this discussion a lot in clinic right now with patients and patient families as it relates to food security, the ability to eat what you want when you want. Everyone that is sheltering at home is experiencing a different level of food security and food choices right now. A registered dietitian can help identify ways to adjust eating behavior and patterns so that you can meet the unique nutrition goals. For overnutrition, it's often a discussion about potentially lighter meals, different food choices, maybe a more regimented snack and fluid pattern. For undernutrition, high calorie eating with a focus on high calorie ingredients in meals, nutrition drinks, nutrition shakes, or even enteral nutrition support can be right for the person. And I like having all of these conversations and expectations from the moment I meet a family, because I think in any given situation, you might experience all of these things. And so it's important to know the options on the table and to have a safe place to talk about what your options are and how realistic they might be for your specific self or family. Next slide, please. There's also a number of nutritional side effects related to treatment or disease process. Weight gain and increased appetite or hunger may be related to steroid use. We also see blood sugar increases with steroid use sometimes. And these are really important considerations for people who are specifically taking prednisone, deflazacort, in my population specifically. And my counseling includes expectation setting first and foremost, and then preemptive meal and snack planning so that people can adjust eating patterns based off what they're seeing on a day-to-day basis. I really want people to be able to prioritize their nutrition choices so that they continue to include foods and nutrition in their diet that bring them and their family the most satisfaction. And then also limiting foods that you might otherwise feel neutral about, that might be increasing calorie or carbohydrate intake and affecting blood sugar or weight gain negatively. Depending on blood sugar changes, there may be foods or drinks that are off limits, but I think for the most part, there's a lot of room for flexibility in making these diet changes. And I will speak more specifically to this in a little bit, but I do find myself really trying to dig into what's important to the family and how we can relate that personal preference with nutritional needs. GI side effects like constipation, gas, and bloating are common, very common, always a topic of conversation. And they're often caused by weakened stomach muscles, limited movement. Diet inadequacies like too little fiber or fluid can also play a big role here. And I see that very commonly in the pediatric population. Medications can also have a constipating side effect. And people requiring oxygen support might have more gas and bloating. So depending on the situation, there may be diet changes that can help improve GI symptoms. If at minimum, they won't add to diet symptoms. Sometimes there's diet strategies that at least won't increase negative side effects that you might be experiencing from medications that you need to be taking. There are some medications that could cause increased saliva and drooling. It could also be caused by weakened tongue and throat muscles. And while I don't necessarily have a nutrition strategy to fix this altogether, it's important to talk about because there are extra medications that can help with this. I specifically relate it to diet because on my end, I want to make sure that there's no risk of dehydration if there's extra losses through that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. No one likes having labs drawn. Whoops. Thank you. So no one likes having labs drawn. And I think that's why on my end, I appreciate a really solid diet recall when my visits with families and patients to make sure that I can use my skills to pull from that recall to see which nutrients might be lacking. Sometimes it's incredibly obvious, which is great because we might not need to pull labs in order to say that we need to increase X, Y, and Z food choice or implement a supplement. Sometimes it's not so easy, and so that's where labs really come in to be helpful. I do like at least annual lab monitoring to ensure that more therapies aren't warranted, especially depending on how frequently I am seeing people or if there hasn't been any kind of dietitian diet recall in the past. The nutrients that I specifically look for in my practice often include vitamin D. It's low in many, many people. And in this case, choosing good sources of vitamin D foods in the diet, plus a supplement, which is often in the form of a pill, is most commonly the answer. Testing glucose tolerance is important to monitor for pre-diabetes and diabetes. And if someone advances to diabetes, medications may be needed. And so I do look at diet changes as step one before medication. A healthy diet with a specific focus on type and quantity of carbohydrate is the answer in this specific case. And a dietitian can certainly help map out what that means for you and help implement strategies to keep your goals in line. Testing iron in the blood does help to identify anemia. And if low in iron, choosing good iron sources in the diet and taking a supplement is the answer. A lot of iron supplements in people can cause GI upset. And so I really try to encourage adequate iron intake from the beginning in order to prevent the need for iron pills from a more severe form of anemia. So adequate iron intake is always at the forefront of my discussion, even if you aren't anemic from the beginning. And then lastly, a lipid panel will help identify abnormalities in cholesterol and triglycerides specifically, which are very important markers for heart health. Diet changes are the very first step in addressing abnormal levels. followed then by medication management if we can't improve the labs despite our best efforts to improve your diet quality. I do discuss later in this presentation what those specific diet changes need. I'll just dangle the carrot for now. I do want to back up and just do a broad discussion of macronutrients and micronutrients because I think it's important to be knowledgeable about these food types in the context of meal planning and healthy eating and eating for your specific nutrition needs. So I think knowing why someone is telling you to eat certain foods is absolutely key. So let's just start with the macronutrients, meaning the main nutrients: carbohydrate, protein, and fat. Carbohydrates are very important for good health. They get a very bad reputation, but as they relate to growing people, meaning small children, carbohydrates are very important for brain health. Growing kids need about 130 grams of carbs per day to support minimum brain function per the WHO. As you get older, you can get away with more carbohydrate restriction. But again, it does just depend on personal individualized needs. Carbs provide the body with glucose, which is then used as energy for the body. It's widely recommended Dietary Guidelines, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, that carbs make up about half of our total calories. The range recommended is about 45 to 65%, with someone with lower energy needs needing less and someone with higher energy needs potentially needing more. Carbohydrate food groups include dairy, fruit, starches, and then sweets, which is the more obvious one for lots of people. Based on that list, you can see why I often find myself telling people it's about the quality of carbohydrate, not necessarily the quantity. Dairy, fruit, and starches like bread, rice, and beans can be great sources of nutrition. And then the sweets are on the carbohydrate food list, and that's an area where we can probably all serve to pull back a little bit. And I'll talk more specifically about added sugars in just a moment. Fiber first. Fiber is important across the entire lifespan. And I would say that in my clinic in neuromuscular disease, but also in the other clinics that I work in, broadly, most people need to be working on improving fiber intake. And I catch myself saying that and then double checking my own fiber intake every day. It's important for gut health. It works in favor of bowel regularity to prevent constipation. And it's been shown to lower risk of type 2 diabetes and heart disease. Fiber is labeled water soluble or water insoluble, but don't get too hung up on that because both forms are good and important for us. They just serve a little bit of a different purpose in us. Soluble fibers like oats, peas, beans, and psyllium can help lower blood cholesterol and help control glucose levels. Insoluble fiber, like whole wheat, nuts, vegetables, these are the key players in bowel regularity. So for obvious reasons, they're both good, but they both serve different purposes. So getting foods from both food groups is important. All right, but how much fiber? That's the next question. Next slide, there we go. Average intake across the American diet is about 15 grams of fiber daily, and that's suboptimal for both adults and children. It's half of a normal adult intake. And so I will address specific strategies to increase fiber, but this is the reason why I focus on it so often, is because across the board, across the lifespan and across multiple conditions, we find that we're not getting quite enough fiber. It's been proven to help across multiple medical conditions. Sugar. Okay. So sugars or sweets are the fourth category of carbohydrates where we should exercise some caution. Added sugar is different than natural sugar. And I have this conversation daily, weekly in clinic, and it's a good question and good conversation to have. There are natural sugars like lactose and fructose, and they're the sugars that we get from fruits and from dairy. Sucrose is what we think of as sugar. It's that white table sugar. And nearly 70% of added sugar intake comes from about 5 food categories. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans reported that nearly 70% of added sugar comes from sweetened drinks, desserts, coffee and tea drinks with additions, candy, and breakfast cereals and bars. And those same guidelines recommend that we take in less than 10% of calories from added sugars. I will note that the 2020 guidelines were only just released this past month, and they actually recommend less than 6% of energy or calories coming from added sugars. So step 1 for me, my practice is to identify added sugar intake from beverages. The guidelines for Americans noted that sugar-sweetened beverages account for about 1/3 of total beverage consumption. And so if I note that someone is having a high intake of soda, juice, sports drink, just making the switch to sugary drinks to non-sugary drinks is sometimes enough of a significant change that we can see lab improvements before we even touch the food choices that you're making. And often making one small change like that leads into bigger, more impactful change. But let me tell you, if you're someone that tells me that you're drinking a lot of soda and we're looking at blood sugar levels and we cut that down, sometimes that change is enough to see a good difference. So that's step 1 for me, is addressing beverage intake and sugar from beverages. Next slide. Protein. It's a very hot topic, and it should be. It's very important. It's responsible for the health of muscles, bones, tissues. Amino acids are called the building blocks of protein, and amino acids can be classified as complete or incomplete. To summarize, incomplete proteins just do not contain all 22 amino acids, but that just means it's important to eat a variety of protein foods to make sure you're getting all of the essential amino acids from your different protein foods. Next slide. Okay. It's really important to me that someone considers the protein package that they're choosing relative to their specific needs. Proteins come from animal sources or from plant sources. Animal proteins like chicken, turkey, fish, beef, egg, dairy. These provide calories and iron, but they're also sources of cholesterol and fat. Plant proteins like beans, lentils, seeds, tofu, quinoa, they give the body fiber and iron, but they're lower in calories, and you do need to eat more in volume to match the same amount of protein. Choosing a variety of protein foods will make sure you get all of the amino acids the body needs. And I will be honest, most people would do well to eat more plant protein than animal protein. I eat animal protein, but I also think that having a day or two or multiple a week where your protein intake is more plant than animal is good for overall health. For people and families that choose to eat only plant proteins, this is a very healthy choice for everyone in the family. I just pay particular attention to certain nutrients to make sure that something they might not be getting from animal protein, they are still getting in their vegetarian diet. I also have found that protein goals tend to be very inflated for people that I meet across the lifespan. So just to throw some numbers, if you're interested in the calculations, people need about, at baseline, this is baseline needs, 0.8 grams of protein per kilo. And then of course, more than that is often found to be needed for people with muscular dystrophy, but I do stop my calculations at 1.5 times that baseline. It's important to consider everyone's individual needs, but more important too is to know that protein beyond what each individual body needs really just results in extra calories. And that can often lead to undesirable weight gain in people. And so if weight gain is a goal, extra protein is a great tool. But I do try to be mindful of not encouraging excessive protein relative to the person's needs. Fat. There are different types of fat. Simply stated, we'll talk about saturated and unsaturated fat. because these are the specific ones for heart health that I pay attention to. It's incredibly important for heart health to replace saturated fats with unsaturated fats. This can help lower LDL cholesterol in adults and boys especially. Saturated fats increase LDL and total cholesterol levels. Saturated fats are those that are solid at room temperature, and they're found most commonly in fatty meats, poultry skin, dairy products, butter, and coconut oil. Like saturated fats, trans fats raise LDL and total cholesterol, but it's also important to know that they actually lower HDL cholesterol. HDL cholesterol is the healthy kind that we actually want to keep up in its normal range. Trans fats are chemically processed and can be found in many baked foods, pantry snacks, fried foods, shortening and stick margarines, and even some coffee creamers. You can see it on the nutrition label labeled underneath fats, and in the ingredients list, it'll be listed as hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated. Next slide. So here's a short list of unsaturated fats to include in the diet that supports good calorie intake and can actually improve blood cholesterols and lower inflammation. These fats are liquid at room temperature, and I recommend people eat them every day and use them liberally. They are a good source of fat, and so be mindful that they are a source of calories if we're watching that. But because they are fat, they actually help keep us satisfied if we're eating adequate amounts at mealtime. And it can actually reduce unhealthy snacking behavior between meals. Olive oil, nuts, avocado, and fish are my preferred sources of unsaturated fats. Important to note too are omega-3 fatty acids, which are important to improve lipid levels and support heart health. You'll find these in fatty fish, in flaxseed oil, walnuts, walnut oil, and I say fit these in wherever you can. Okay. So like I said, the Dietary Guidelines for Americans 2020 report was very recently released, and it was in line with my current practice and education topics for families. But it did note underconsumption across the board of vitamin D, calcium, dietary fiber, and potassium, as they quoted it as a public health concern. So I certainly have kicked up my assessment of these nutrients. So let's talk about what it means for people with neuromuscular disease. Calcium is important for strong bones, strong teeth. It's important for functions of and for the blood, nerves, heart. It's stored in the bones and teeth, but when the body doesn't get enough of it, it will be pulled from the bones, and we want to prevent that from happening. Calcium is found in dairy, some veggies, fish bones, and fortified foods. A very abbreviated list where you can get your calcium includes sardines with bones, milk, yogurt, fortified orange juice, bok choy, and broccoli. Next slide. Vitamin D helps with calcium absorption, so it works together. And it's important to help keep bones strong. It's important for muscle function, immunity, and inflammation as well. We do get some D from the sun, but adequate levels do require us to get vitamin D from our diet, from food or supplements. And food sources can include canned salmon, fish oil, egg. There's also a lot of fortified food options in milk, cereal, and orange juice as well. Iron. It's important for oxygen transport in the blood, and if deficient, you can feel tired, have poor appetite, grow poorly, and have trouble concentrating. It's important to be able to rule out an iron deficiency as the cause of these symptoms versus something else causing these symptoms. So I am looking for your intake from animal sources and from plant sources. What we've seen so far is that iron from animal sources is often better absorbed than plant-based iron. But regardless of iron source, we also know that vitamin C improves absorption. So pairing iron foods with vitamin C foods helps improve total iron intake. On a similar but opposite note, calcium gets in the way of good iron absorption. So we want to be careful not to eat your primary calcium foods with your primary iron foods, because they will interfere with each other and you won't reap the benefits from either. Sources of iron include meat and seafood, spinach, peanut butter, raisins. Cereals are often fortified breakfast cereals, and also tofu. Okay, lastly, potassium. It's a mineral important for heart and muscle function. It's been shown to actually help blood pressure levels as well. Its primary sources that we look for are potato, both sweet potato and brown potato, greens, dairy, and avocado. Okay, I've laid all of the options out there. Let's talk about what meal planning looks like then. The what and the why. Now we've got to get to the how. So how do we make sure we're meeting our nutrition needs? Like I mentioned in my very beginning, is that meal planning is such a personal process, and it does require knowing your specific nutrition needs, but also balancing priorities, family eating behavior, budget, time, accessibility, all of these important things. And so I like presenting these big picture meal planning guidelines and then narrowing down how guidelines can meet a single person's individual needs. But I do find that using this as your base is a good place to double check diet intake and make sure that at minimum these basic nutrition needs are met. And then of course I like working on fine tuning it for specifics. Okay, to start, the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, 20 to 25, so the ones just released this month. I was pleased to see that there are consistencies with current practice and these most recent updated guidelines. We know and we try to establish healthy eating behavior from a young age. These help support lifelong healthy eating habits, and it supports the more immediate goal in childhood of supporting appropriate growth and development. That being said, it's never too late to have a reset button and restart healthy eating habits later in age. In general, I also like looking at a household or a family to support total nutrition goals. So I often speak to the family as far as the family should emphasize fruits and vegetables, choosing seafood if they want to or can or are able, prioritizing whole grains over other grains, and then making sure those heart healthy oils are included instead of the solid oils. Next slide. Healthier outcomes per these dietary guidelines were associated with higher intake of fruits, vegetables, beans, whole grains, low or non-fat dairy, lean meats, but then also a lower intake of red and processed meats, meaning sausage, bacon, deli meat, lower intake of sugar-sweetened food and drinks, and refined grains, an example being white bread. Unhealthy outcomes were found to be related to higher intake of red and processed meats, sugar-sweetened foods, and refined grains. Okay, eating tips. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is just a little sneak peek to what I prioritize. What does all of this mean? What am I telling you? So consistent eating is important, first and foremost. Try not to skip meals and include a food source of protein at every meal. Getting into the habit of reading nutrition labels and comparing similar items is also important. When comparing, look for foods that have less added sugar, and you'll see that listed separately under the title Total Carbohydrates on a nutrition label. And even better, while you're looking at the label, look for foods with dietary fiber, which is also underneath that total carbohydrate subsection. Drink lots of water. For someone that's not accustomed to drinking a lot of water, good water intake is an important first step. And a healthy habit that I like to suggest is to have a cup or 8 ounces every time you do something every day, brushing your teeth, for example. And so if you go from no water intake to drinking 16 ounces of water because you drink 8 ounces twice a day, that's an automatic improvement. So think of things you do every day, medications, hygiene, any kind of personal cares, and leave a reminder by way of sticky note or even a bottle of water right there where you're doing those things every day. Visual reminders work best for me, and I find that they work really well for others. Limit sodium or salt intake where you can. Step 1 would be removing the salt shaker from the dining table. Step 2 might be not adding salt while cooking and using instead herbs or sodium-free spices that'll keep your food tasting good, but without increasing the sodium intake. Step 3 would be then choosing the foods that are just inherently lower in sodium. So those would be foods in their most natural form, whole vegetables, raw grains, fresh meats, as opposed to the packaged or prepared versions of those foods. Canned vegetables can be used, just rinse them before eating, or reduce the salt by choosing a lower sodium canned option. Frozen vegetables often don't have any salt added to them, so that's a great choice as well. Be mindful that pantry items have to abide by labeling instructions. And so while pantry items are often the primary sources of salt for a lot of people, choose items that are added, that labeled with no salt added or low sodium, and that can be a very good practice. Heart-healthy fats, chosen from the list of unsaturated and omega-3s in the previous slides, are important. So you can choose those foods that also practice heart-healthy cooking methods, meaning using those fats as ingredients, choosing to bake or steam or saute as opposed to frying. That all reduces the total amount of the unhealthy fat that we look for in heart health. Add vegetables. Always add vegetables. There's room for vegetables everywhere. When I work with the pediatric population, I really try to find the foods that they're already eating and think of new and interesting ways to add vegetables. And I say that I do that with the pediatric population, but then I laugh because I find that the same practice works just as well for adults. You can always find ways to add more vegetables. If you're monitoring carbs or working on weight management, reducing the portion size of starchy foods is an effective way to improve total intake. The next slides will go into the plate method for meal planning, which kind of gives you proportions of foods to each other. But a starting goal, just a subjective starting goal, if you're looking to reduce your carb intake, is just to focus on those starchy foods and cut down by half on the portion size. Okay, the plate method. It's my preferred tool for meal planning. It's the replacement for the food pyramid that a lot of people might have learned a while ago. I find this to be much more realistic and useful. And in my practice, I always favor realistic options over the unrealistic ones. The plate method is helpful for a visual learner, especially I love this because I can visualize this as I'm plating a meal. Here's the method. Envision the plate in front of you, divided into sections as you see on the screen. When you're meal planning, make half of that plate fruits and vegetables. Make 1/4 of the plate a whole grain. The remaining 1/4 is protein. And then you can pair this meal with dairy or even just water. And I really like this method because it can apply regardless of size of plate or type of food. And it helps keep the proportion of nutrients balanced to each other. So filling your plate with fruits and vegetables, half of your plate, I should say. Other people like to add on that you should eat these foods first. Sure, absolutely. Mix up your fruits and vegetables as you can. This works really well for younger kiddos who might be picky eaters. Adults are also picky eaters. For someone struggling to get their family to eat vegetables, an important reminder is that it doesn't have to be fancy. If you'll eat cucumbers and carrots, then that counts as your vegetable choice. Let that be the primary vegetable, but then keep trying to mix in different versions because you do get a different set of nutrients from each vegetable choice. And so different colors, different types offer you different nutrition options. And so try to keep things rotating and different, but if you've got no other options and baby carrots are on the plate, that's a vegetable, that counts. If you are working with a picky eater, adult or child alike, have one known accepted food on the plate and then offer something new and different. So there's always a safe comfort food available. Okay, grains. Try to choose whole grains more often than not. This is brown rice, whole wheat pasta. Whole potatoes, corn, and peas are categorized as starchy carbohydrates. And so I put them into the grains option when I'm using this method for meal planning. A 1/4 plate being proteins. Looking back at that list of the plant and animal proteins, You'll notice that I put an asterisk next to beans and lentils, not because anything is wrong with them. By no means is there anything wrong with them. They're just also considered grains. So they do double work for you. They're a grain and a protein. Okay, pair your meal with unsweetened, unflavored milk. If it's what works best for the family, choose low or non-fat milk. If you choose milk alternatives by choice or by need, because of tolerance, make sure more often you're having unsweetened versions of almond, soy, hemp, oat. There's lots of non-dairy options available now, which is really great for the families that need or want it. Alternatively, if you're not a dairy drinker, you can also include in this section your unsweetened, unflavored yogurt to can serve the same purpose nutrition-wise. And again, if you're doing that, water, water, water. Make sure you're meeting hydration needs elsewise if you're replacing your dairy to drink with dairy to eat. Okay. I included a broad list of eating tips earlier, and the principles for heart-healthy eating are similar there. So choosing fruits, vegetables, whole grains, but limiting alcohol intake, limiting sugar intake, emphasizing high fiber foods, and limiting sodium intake. Those are on the eating tips list specific to their heart healthy qualities. How to add more fiber. So this is the how, you got the why, here's the how. In the context of meal planning, I do want to talk about how that actually looks and how it works. So look at breakfast choices. Choose whole grain cereals like in your bread or your oatmeal. You can add fiber foods like psyllium husk, chia seed, granola, oats, beans, nuts, to breakfast egg scrambles, oatmeal, smoothies. You also don't need to eat breakfast foods for breakfast. So if you're having pasta or rice, you can have that in the morning in its whole grain, whole wheat form. Eat whole fruits instead of drinking juice to get more fiber from the whole fruit. The same thing goes for vegetables. So eating a vegetable over drinking the juice or taking a vegetable supplement is preferred. And then when you're looking at labels, compare the two and choose the one that has more fiber. So if you're underweight or experiencing unintentional weight loss, it's important to increase calories to stop weight loss or to help with weight gain. So the first step is having an eating schedule. That is one that has meals and ideally some snacks throughout the day. And try to avoid grazing with this schedule. Grazing being small snacking throughout the day, because it keeps you from getting truly hungry. And then intake over the course of the day is actually less, even though you're eating more frequently. Solid foods before liquids will help to make sure that you're getting the most nutrition bang for your buck, because most of the time the food that we eat gives us more calories, more total nutrition than something we drink. We don't want to fill up on lower calorie liquids when we could be eating high calorie foods. That being said, if food intake is troublesome or undesirable, it's necessary to add calories from milkshakes or smoothies or even nutrition drinks like Ensure, Boost, Pediasure. There's a myriad options available depending on your nutrition goals and needs. And then for the food preparer, when you're eating and preparing meals, add calories with avocado, oil, cheese, butter, dried fruit, eggs, nut butter. I like this option if you feel like you're at your max capacity for volume of food. You can't take another bite. So therefore, we just need to maximize every calorie bite you take. So by adding those high calorie additives, you're not increasing the amount of food, you're just increasing the density of the food. So what if you can't meet those calorie goals with food? And that's a common concern. Shakes and drinks from the grocery stores and pharmacies can provide extra calories. Things like I mentioned Pediasure and Boost and Kate Farms, and there's a lot. There is a lot, and I'm always trying to keep up with the options, but they usually offer somewhere over 240 calories for 8 ounces. And that's usually a good amount for those looking to increase intake. And for some people, that's their primary source of nutrition. Specific to children, these drinks are often covered by insurance if you, especially if the child does carry a diagnosis of failure to thrive or malnutrition, especially. It does require a registered dietitian assessment for most families. But it's helpful because these drinks do become quite costly. So especially if you find yourself needing more than one, even one per day can be expensive. And so if you need more than one per day, it's certainly pricey. For those that want this option, but cost is a barrier, I really lean into the homemade smoothie and milkshake option because we can usually find a recipe that provides similar nutrition in 8 ounces for less money. And then, of course, for those that can't meet weight or weight gain goals with oral nutrition, meaning food, drink, smoothie, supplement, it's important to have a discussion about the option of tube feeding support. And tube feeds can be used in addition to oral nutrition for most people. If the person is safe to chew and swallow solids and liquids, the tube feed doesn't need to take the place of an oral diet. It just supplements the oral diet and helps with our weight goals. I did link here the Tube Feeding Awareness Foundation, which is a great patient resource about feeding tubes. And I like this site because it's actually a foundation run by parent volunteers. And so it's meant to be a resource for parents of children who are tube fed. I find it helpful for anyone across the lifespan. It's got pictures, it's got resources, it's got real life stories. And the language is real, it's not medical, it's honest. And I think that the representation of tube feeding support is there to support people who need to thrive. The website is feedingtubeawareness.org, and I really encourage you to check it out if you're interested. Here's also a list of resources not only used for this presentation, but things that I like to direct my patients to. It's got a myriad of options for nutrition information. There's Healthy Eating for Good Nutrition, the summary of the 2015 and 2020 Dietary Guidelines, and then specific nutrition as it relates to Duchenne, diabetes, GI, and heart health. Okay, that's it. Thank you for letting me present today. I welcome questions and comments, please.
Sorry about that. My mouse was not wanting to pay attention, was not wanting to do what I wanted it to do. So I apologize.
No, you're fine.
We do have a couple questions. Is there a multivitamin you would recommend for 55 and older folks? Again, it depends on what you're looking for. I've been very unsatisfied about the options for liquid multivitamins. I find myself just constantly kind of searching and looking for liquid choices. But to be honest, Centrum Silver is a really complete multivitamin as long as you're able to chew or swallow a tablet of that size. And I do think that while not everybody needs a multivitamin, it is a really good idea to take it to cover your bases, especially if you do know that there's places in your diet that you're insufficient in your intake. So yeah, as obvious as that might seem, Centrum Silver is a great option. Okay. Well, there's a lot on the market too, so I think there's a lot of confusion.
I agree. I find myself being quite angry walking down the vitamin aisle because I know a lot about these things and I still find myself confused.
We have a question about weight gain targeting the gut area. Is gut gain a sign of too much intake and thus the solution simply, reduce that? However, the question comes into play is when exercise opportunity is difficult due to immobility. It seems it's impossible to, improve losing weight in this area. Is there any way you can help?
It's an incredibly frustrating place to be in. And I have yet to find the perfect one solution answer to that. But I think there's a lot of components in that. I think increasing total intake, if you're looking for weight gain, that's why it's important to focus on total nutrient intake, not just increasing protein or increasing fat, because I have found that if you're increasing just, for example, your fat intake or just your carbohydrate intake, it does often lead to just greater fat mass as opposed to total body weight increases. I have yet to find a focused gut weight loss approach, but I do think it's important to be mindful of how you're finding yourself gaining weight, because, this is the conversation I love having, like, please tell me if I can see a scale and I see weight gain and that was our goal, I could be really thrilled. But especially in the setting of remote assessments like this, it's important to know where and how you're gaining weight, because we don't want to pack on weight just around the central midsection, because that's not the ideal. So I guess all of this is to say, I don't have the perfect solution for addressing and losing weight in that midsection, but I do want everyone to speak up if you find that you're on a weight gain management plan and that's the only place you're feeling yourself gaining weight, because that's not the goal. But But in order to best approach that from the beginning is if you're increasing your calories, doing it from all of the food groups and not choosing just one to emphasize.
Mm-hmm. A question came in. What about the keto diet? It seems that the keto diet is all over, media and newspapers and magazines, but is that really a healthy option for someone?
So I would say it's still, and obviously it's not a new diet. It's new to getting so much attention. From what I have seen specific to neuromuscular disease, I haven't seen any focused studies on the keto diet and any evidence that supports it being specifically helpful for neuromuscular disease. That being said, from my experience with families, it's hard to sustain, which would be my point against it. It's often noted to be more expensive, which is another realistic point against it. Mm-hmm. But if you are an adult interested in the ketogenic diet, I like having that conversation and really discussing what that looks like too, being sure that you're looking at your nutrition options from reliable sources on what that actually means. But I would say more often than not, if someone is interested in that, I focus them towards what I would call a modified keto diet that isn't quite as restricted in those carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. I never recommend it for children. There's not nearly enough studies to tell us that it's safe for children, especially because we do know that carbohydrates are the primary form of brain nutrition for the first 20 plus years. So I will speak out against the keto for children, but I am open to having that conversation for adults. But do be mindful of the source where you're getting your information, because like you said, it's gained so much attention. And so it's all over the internet, and that doesn't necessarily mean that everything on there is reliable. So have that conversation with your team.
And do you need to be monitored if you're on one?
It depends on the level of intensity of your diet. That's a very good follow-up question, because if you're just doing a modified Atkins, for example, meaning lower carb intake, I wouldn't say you need to be monitored. But if you're really, really cutting back on carbohydrates, if it were a patient of mine that I'm seeing in clinic, I would want to have monthly check-ins to see how things are going.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps all those up. So thank you very much, Stacy. We've definitely learned a lot. And I know now I'm going to think about that plate sharing when I'm making my meals for my teenager.
Do it. It's great.
All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right. And up next, we are going to talk about caregiver mental health with Lori Miller, and we will be back in just a couple minutes. So stay tuned. Thank you.